Welcome to Conversations. My name is Jason Plotkin. I'm the Program Director at Congregation Emanu, and you probably noticed I'm in a new environment. I'm back in my office. So welcome to our show. Every week we sit down with a member of the congregation community or from the sports world to discuss the current state of affairs. One of the key components of what we've done since starting this program is we've continued to highlight nonprofits and or Jewish organizations in the community that our viewers may not be familiar with. Some of these new institutions in our community you may be more familiar with than others, and others perhaps not. I feel that it obviously exposes the work of these groups within our community, but also provides an example of what we've all learned during the pandemic. So with that, I'd like to welcome Elise Hough, the CEO of Easter Seals, which provides autism services, early intervention, workforce development, adults daycare, and more. Elise, welcome to our show. Thanks for coming to join us. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me today.
Well, we're excited about this. But before we learn what Easter Seals is, I always like to introduce our guests to our viewers. So tell us about you and what led you to the role you're currently in with the Houston branch of Easter Seals.
I came from the for-profit world, so I am a CPA and an attorney, and I used to do kind of the really boring part of mergers and acquisitions on the tax side, which I loved. But my husband had a really bad medical event, and so I was his caregiver for a few years. And when I came back to work when he was ready, I wanted to do something to take what I'd learned in the for-profit world and apply it in the nonprofit world. So this was a great fit for me.
All right, so Easter Seals, if you can give us a 30,000 feet in the air view of what this organization's role is, not only nationally, but here on the local level. I think that I'm sure you're used to giving the elevator pitch, if you will. Please tell us a bit about the organization.
So nationally, we're one of the largest providers of services to people with disabilities, as well as one of the largest non-governmental organizations serving military families. And Easter Seals locally, we serve about 14,000 families every year in Houston and 21 surrounding counties. We are the only area agency that serves military families as well as people of any age with any type of disability, and with a big focus on the whole family, not just the person with the disability, but trying to look at the needs of the family as a whole.
So, one of the neat things as I was preparing for this interview, one of the things I learned about Easter Seals is that about 1/3 of your staff either has a disability or is a caregiver for a person with one. That really struck me as just a neat thing, considering your mission that you kind of just explained. Tell us a bit about how that came about, because I really find it to be a true feather in your cap, per se.
It's interesting because I had a foundation ask me that about 10 years ago, and I'd never thought about it. It's just part of who we are. And, I just shared with you a little bit of my story. Caregiving for somebody with a profound disability who has an opportunity to recover is different than a caregiver of somebody who will always be or may have a progressive disability. And so I think people are drawn to it. Lots of amazing nonprofits in Houston, but I think ours is really, really mission driven, in part because the work speaks to the heart of a lot of our folks because they're living with it.
Wow. The pandemic has stricken the world, and I really like talking to organizations about what they've done and how they've pivoted. I think that's a key word. But Easter Seals, as we've learned, has quite the role to play on multiple levels. And the services your organization provides are vital to its clients. To use a sports analogy, no one had a playbook for this. I always like to use sports analogies, so I apologize. But what processes were playing out at the onset of the pandemic to keep as many of the services intact as possible?
We had some families complain because we closed our group services in mid-February and they thought we were overreacting. I'm so glad we did. One of the really great things is we have a program called Bridging Apps, which uses mobile technology to help people with disabilities and caregivers connect to the world. And we were able to use what we had learned through that process to help our programs move to telehealth and to telegroups. And as much as possible support we have in high school for at-risk high school kids. We have services in school. So just to keep people connected. So our Bridging Apps program not only helped us translate all of our services into teleservices, but also reached out and we were able to help a lot of other community organizations do the same.
Well, that's fascinating. So February is when you guys made the decision, and the rest of us a month later. So you really were ahead of the game, and that probably gave you some wiggle room to really get things in order before the rest of the world, if you will.
Okay, that's paranoia. That was not intelligence. And we didn't really move everything to telehealth until mid-March. And so, but it did give us that time. Our staff were able, our early intervention staff who go into the home and provide physical, occupational, speech therapy, it gave them time to actually learn from other programs that had been using telehealth, to do best practices, to work on each other. So we did have a little bit of a cushion of time.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure not all of us were ready. Some of us were, as I've talked to others on the show, some of us were really ready, and it wasn't a big move, but certainly any cushion of time or things you had in play certainly help. So caregivers, you mentioned earlier that you were a caregiver for your husband. I find that many people are familiar with caregivers, whether they have had one for an immediate family member, whether they are a caregiver, or maybe someone in their friend circle. And I feel that caregivers have challenges regardless of the circumstances, and certainly the pandemic has probably heightened that level of challenge. So what were some of the challenges, just for our audience to kind of have an understanding, what challenges do caregivers in particular face during the pandemic that they might not experience in the regular scheme of things, or maybe things that were heightened?
I love that you asked that question, because so many people don't understand, and so many supporters and volunteers don't understand what our caregivers are living with. People with disabilities, their families are about 5 times as likely to result in a divorce. The result is that a lot of times a person with a disability ends up institutionalized, whether that's a nursing home or a state facility. There's high levels of abuse. So focusing on the caregiver is important. Many caregivers feel guilty about the fact that they're ticked off about the fact that they have somebody who they have to caregive for all the time. And many of them also work outside of the home or have another child that they have to care for. We have tons of families who are sandwich generation. So they're caregiving for a senior as well as for a child with a disability. And many feel very isolated anyway. And what the pandemic did was sort of put all of that into kind of a pressure cooker, so you're at home, you don't have any relief, you don't even have work to go to, you don't have any outside release of all of that stress. So it was one of the first things we did. We did salary cuts, and we did do some layoffs, but we added mental health professionals because we knew this was going to be just a huge amount of stress for the families that we work with.
Wow. And, another vulnerable population that I think about often here in the Jewish community, we have some organizations that work with these groups, is the intellectual developmentally disabled population. I have read that this group, and I know this from my own experiences seeing in the community, that this group predominantly lives with their families, many of whom are elderly parents, which is a vulnerable population as relates to COVID, as we're all aware. What has Easter Steel specifically done to focus on the people that make up these dynamic homes?
So that's a big part of who we serve, and from early intervention to our camps, and we have play groups every week. We've tried to keep those as engaged as possible. We have a teen group for kids, many who have intellectual disabilities, and then we have adult program. Again, many of the folks have intellectual disabilities, and so giving them some sense of normalcy and engagement. So for example, we're still teaching our very popular adapted karate, but everybody just joins it by Zoom. And so for a kid with an intellectual disability who may feel left out in day-to-day non-pandemic times, really feels left out when parents are stressed out, worried about finances, worried about other siblings. So as much as possible, we've tried to provide those supports and keep some sense of normalcy, but we've also So we've taken activity boxes to their homes, and then they can join in the Zoom thing, but they have something interactive to play with, or to engage in an activity. And that's for everybody from seniors down to little babies.
I love that. Engaging together is so critical during the pandemic. I know that, it's hard when you're not able to interact with other people, and it's a real challenge to engage together with family and those within your household, and something different like these activity boxes really is a good idea. You've brought up some of the different things you guys at Easter Seals have done to really take care of certain populations, and I think what's interesting, and you guys have such a diverse group of needs and populations that you serve. All organizations and customer service driven businesses have had to adjust during the pandemic. And I think one of the things that you're probably learning is that certain things don't necessarily work for certain groups. We certainly have, obviously, there's different people who might have more technological needs when we're leaning more on technology. Others may not actually have access to technology, but evaluation is key in all of this. How are you guys constantly evaluating what you're doing to make sure that you're properly serving your personnel and your clientele, if you will?
So we do regular communication with our staff, and through their teams, we try to have particularly for this, because it was so stressful for our staff dealing with their own family's needs, but more importantly, they were really upset about the fact that they weren't going to be able to keep serving our clients, and were very willing to learn how to do that and learn from each other. One of the biggest groups that we have been able to help is particularly for kids with intellectual disabilities or kids maybe with ADHD or autism. Distance learning doesn't work. And it means basically the parent has to become the teacher, because they can't self-direct activities. Many of them, as you said, don't have the technology. So we were so fortunate. We got a number of grants that allowed us to provide devices and training for families. Comcast is one of our national sponsors. They provided free internet because a lot of our families are very low income, didn't have internet. So I would guess that about half of the work that we have done to help support our families has been technology driven. But the feedback that we're getting, a lot of parents, therapy at first, they were willing to do telehealth, and then parents just got burned out. They sort of hit a little trough there in the summer. And so we really asked for a lot of feedback from them to tell us, how can we support you? How can we help? We don't want your baby to lose ground. We don't want your child to lose ground. What do you need? And so we've adapted some of the therapy sessions, some of the frequency of therapy sessions based on that feedback.
Well, it's great that people give feedback. I'm sure, as we all know, we all get feedback all the time, but I'm sure, everyone understands the situation, if you will, that we're all kind of learning as we go along, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
One question that seems to be relevant, no matter who I interview, if it's someone from the sports world or a nonprofit, Jewish organization, or even in the food industry, is we've talked about what will stick. I think everything that we've learned, we've all picked up something, oh, I didn't know that, I had it beforehand, or this would make a lot of sense regardless of the pandemic. So is there something you've experienced in the last few months that you weren't doing previously, as an individual perhaps, or as an organization as a whole, that you see outlasting the pandemic?
So individually, the really bad thing is that I now know the Grubhub guys who deliver to my house. So I hope to lose that bad habit. No, but as an organization, I'm a government skeptic. And so I don't really think they help very often. This was huge. So we got one of the PPP loans, which helped us be able to bring people back to not lose staff. But using the technology now, the telehealth, I think CMS and Health and Human Services has seen, you can provide really excellent, profoundly needed services to people who may be medically fragile, so they don't want to come out for services, or they may have transportation issues, or they may have children and can't get out. They may be a veteran with PTSD who's not comfortable with face-to-face services. that is a piece I really hope we keep. I hope we keep being reimbursed for it so we can continue to provide it. It's not always right. It's not always the best answer, particularly for people dealing with isolation. In-person services are important, but I hope we can find a balance between those two. That's, I really hope, and I think people have seen enough. You can have really effective services that are done through telehealth.
Yeah, and I really do think that, you know, going forward, we're all going to have to offer the option of in person while also investing as much resources into the virtual or digital platforms. In some respects, we've done that here at the Temple with some things, but now we're going to have to look at the full picture and really try to figure out what the best way is. And like you said, some things in person really makes the most sense, and other things you might have that flexibility.
Yeah, and just travel time, mileage. I mean, it's more efficient to do telehealth. So if we can maybe take the savings we have from those, from not having to do those things and invest that in technology, I think we're going to be in much better shape to serve our clients.
That's great. And before we close, I'll split my last question into two. So I recently learned about your fundraiser. We've had previous guests talk about how they've shifted major events, including fundraisers, online. What were some of the highlights of your experience this year as you shifted online? Were there any silver linings that you might do in the future? I know we just talked about what's going to stick, but you broke a record this year on a virtual or digital platform. Tell us a bit about that.
So we were really, Like Minds PR firm helped us get the word out about what we were doing and why we were doing it. Again, we were kind of early. What made the event was we have chairs from Prosperity and Alvarez and Marcel, and they stuck with us, and they convinced the corporate sponsors to stick with us. For me, one of the really cool things was that we had people virtually walking with us from around the world. So from Scotland and Japan and Rwanda, they were walking with me. And it was kind of cool because you could see the animals where they were, because we normally have our event at the zoo. One of our board members did it from her ranch, and she has like chickens and turkeys following her down the road, you know. I think that was cool, but it also gave people who may not be able to attend an event a chance to meet our clients, to see the people that they were helping support. So we were lucky, and I think a little bit smart with that. And just, we were stunned that we raised a record in our 74-year history. That's the most we've ever raised with an event. So, and grateful,
Yeah.
Really, really grateful for that.
And that's really neat. You brought up the people got to watch from various countries around the world, which exposed, you know, some of the people you work with, your organization, and they got to connect. And I really think that's one of the great things about that have come out of COVID, is that all the geographic barriers have fallen, and everything is accessible now. So it's all at your fingertips.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So two things I like to end with. First thing is, I always like to end with a takeaway or a positive note. So let's start with the positive note. I would love for you to share an opportunity, or share ways in which, you know, people can play a part in helping your organization now. What are ways people can help your organization now?
So we are still virtually mentoring high school kids. So if people want to help us mentor, we're looking for job placements. We have an employment program. So if you are a company and you are looking for really great workers who may need a little support, we would love to connect with you. If you have a device that's maybe a year or two old and you're about to trade it in and get $50 at Best Buy, give it to us. And we will place it with one of those homes of people who are trying to find a device to either keep engaged, to connect a senior to the community, to their grandkids, and obviously money, and really just being aware of the fact that you have neighbors with disabilities, whether that's a kid with autism, a senior who's had a stroke. It really does affect almost every single family. And so just keep us in your good thoughts.
Before I get to my last question, what are some of the ways that people can find out this information or get a hold of you or other people within Easter Seals Houston?
Our website is pretty good. So the best way is you can email info, I-N-F-O, at eastersealshouston.org, or visit our website, eastersealshouston.org. And the technology program that I referenced, Bridging Apps, has its own website. We have about 25,000 users from around the world every month. It's bridging, B-R-I-D-G-I-N-G, apps.org. And you can find a lot of resources, app reviews for education, mental health, recreation, all kinds of great stuff there.
And for those who are watching this on Facebook or YouTube, I will make sure to post the links that Elise just shared, so you'll have access to those. Obviously, she mentioned eastersealshouston.org is a good hub for that. And Elise, the last question is, I always like to hear a positive story that has come out of the pandemic. I know you mentioned the fundraiser, but something that you've experienced, something that resonates with you, that kind of sticks with you, as something that, that makes you smile as you're thinking about your work.
So I mentioned our adapted play groups, and we were surprised that parents really wanted to keep their kids doing it. But what's been really so fun is that now the parents and the siblings, you can see them in the background on Zoom, it's really great. So it's actually engaged the families a lot more in a healthy, fun activity, but something that their child with a disability may not always excel at, sports or physical activities. And it's a place where they can shine. So that's been really fun.
That was really sweet, and for me, I see your smile just lighting up as you shared that story. So that was really,
I love it.
That was really touching. But I want to thank you for coming on, Elise, and thanks to our good friend Jenny Gustafson for connecting us.
Oh, yeah.
I really enjoyed learning more about Easter Seals, and I hope others who are watching certainly do. Thank you again for coming on, and I'm really grateful for this.
Thanks very much. I really appreciate the opportunity.
All right. So for those who are watching us, of course, we'll thank David Tanner, who's behind the scenes helping us as always. Next Wednesday at noon, our show continues. We'll feature our Emanu alums, Shelley Dresner of Temple Sinai in Atlanta, Scott Hertz of Rodef Shalom in New York City. We'll have a roundtable discussion as we prepare for the High Holy Days, finding out what the different priorities were, challenges they're expecting, and how they approach the High Holy Days in general. And this will be 3 large synagogues in 3 metropolitan areas. Again, that's next Wednesday at noon. And as a reminder, if you've missed any episodes prior, including this one, you can always catch all the old episodes in our archives on the Emanu YouTube channel. And we will see you next week. Have a good one, everybody.